Hi, welcome to A Mirror Darkly. While we work out getting everything up and going, I will jabber on. So we want to welcome you today. Today's topic is the origin of the political parties. We are a tad late because we were distracted and I went, hey, it's 4:01. So anyway, and I was finishing inviting people. So we will not be airing a show next Saturday because it is Labor Day weekend, and so we have social obligations on that day, so we will not be here. Wow, my hair's straight. It didn't curl. Anyway, so yeah, we just remember we do this show in segments, so if you have a comment, just put it in the comment box of whatever your stream of choice is, either Facebook or YouTube. And when at the end of the segment, I will bring up any questions or comments that come up. If you think of a topic for a show, let us know because we can put it in the schedule. This show right here was an idea that I had 2 weeks ago, and we just squeezed it into the calendar.
Yeah.
So if something comes up in your head and you're like, I wonder if they'll do a show on this, put it in there, and I bet you we will. Oh, and shout out to my brother. It's his birthday today, so happy birthday, little brother. Doubt if he'll be joining us because he's either at work or he's with his family celebrating. So either way, I don't think they got hit by the hurricane. They would just get a lot of rain. So
yeah, probably.
Yeah, but
yeah, because it hit along the border between Louisiana and Texas.
That's
not
okay.
Where they are.
They were. Our friend Dennis is here joining us,
Very
and
good.
Let's see. Whoops, somebody else was there and they disappeared.
Oh, okay.
So it was a phantom listener.
Yes. Okay. Well, political party is an organized group of people who have the same ideology or who otherwise have the same political positions and who field candidates for elections in an attempt to get them elected and thereby implement the party's agenda. They are the defining element of representative democracies worldwide now. The origin of political parties is pretty ancient. It goes back probably to the Athenians. Classical Athens. In the Republic, you see Plato talking about political factions, and Aristotle discusses the tendency of different types of government to produce factions in his work, Politics, or On Politics. So far as the modern conception of political parties, that's primarily thanks to Great Britain. Great Britain, the political factions emerged from the exclusion crisis and the Glorious Revolution in the late 17th century. You had the Whig faction originally organizing itself around support for the Protestant constitutional monarchy as opposed to absolute rule, and then the Tory faction, originally the Royalist or the Cavalier faction of the English Civil War.
They're so Cavalier.
Supporting a strong monarchy. And over time, those developed into, they changed their names, changed their positions. Things shift a lot in politics. One of the things that most people are familiar with is the concept of left versus right. And that actually has its origins after the French Revolution, when they seated themselves
in the chamber.
In the chamber, yeah. Let's see. They appeared during the French Revolution of 1789, when members of the National Assembly divided into supporters of the king to the president's right, and supporters of the revolution to his left. And again, things have changed considerably over time, but the concept of left and right has turned out to be useful as a way of trying to categorize political parties. Although even categorizing them as strictly left or right is not always that precise. Jerry Pournelle came up with a system. He did this, I think, for his dissertation or something at some point. But anyway, it's a graph where it's an X, and you put parties according to...
That's not an X. It's a quadrant graph.
Quadrant graph, yeah, quadrant graph. couldn't remember the term.
I saw that on Facebook. There's one of those, quizzes, like,
Yes.
kind of like the Cosmo quizzes,
Yeah.
They're not very accurate, but it
No, they're not.
puts you
into one of
liberal,
those.
conservative, I forget what the four things were.
Yeah.
But
So there's ways of categorizing things, but even that doesn't always work that well. For instance, to give you an example of something that has wandered about, the suffrage movement, which has just recently celebrated the 100th year since the ratification of the
19th Amendment.
19th
I
Amendment.
think. Yeah.
Anyway, that allowed women to vote. It grows out of, well, you have the progressives during the early 20th century. Theodore Roosevelt is a big proponent of that. You had Democrats, particularly in the South, opposed the concept of women voting. You have a lot of Republicans in favor of it, but then it was actually Woodrow Wilson that finally made the adjustment because a lot of New York Democrats liked the idea, and so it ended up eventually the Congress voted for the amendment, and then it went to the states and it was ratified.
Well, I was watching a thing that said that it wasn't ratified until the Republicans had both the Senate and the House.
That's probably the case.
Okay, so Wilson was probably, he was president?
He was president, and he was kind of forced into it.
Oh, okay.
Kind of like the way Bill Clinton pivoted after the 94 election. Because the House and Senate went Republican, and so he adapted himself to the new political reality. Good politicians do that sort of thing.
Yes.
In any case, the United States, when you think in terms of our political history, you have essentially 5 periods of 5-party systems that have existed over the years. Now, founding fathers were not overly enamored of the concept of having political parties. The United States Constitution is silent on the subject of political parties, and the founding fathers did not originally intend for American politics to be partisan. In the Federalist Papers number 9 and 10, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, respectively, wrote specifically about the dangers of domestic political factions. And in addition, the first president of the United States, George Washington, never belonged to any political party whatsoever. What's ironic...
Well, he was kind of the only one running, too. I mean, being the first president.
Yeah, but there was... Political parties didn't exist really yet.
Right,
but that came to a conclusion right after Washington.
Was he competing against anybody for the job, or did
Not
they just
really.
be like, why don't you be our first president?
Well, they did actually formally vote and all of that.
Right.
But yeah, it was pretty much a done deal.
Okay. That was always my feeling. That I never really thought about it, but that was always kind of my feeling, like he just kind of got the job.
Yeah.
So.
And Washington also had hoped that political parties would not be formed. He feared conflict and stagnation, and that's actually outlined in his farewell address when he left office.
Conflict? Well,
he
was way off on that one, that political parties would have done.
Going back to the Federalist Papers number 9 and 10, written by Madison and Hamilton, and their opposition to the concept of political parties, the irony is that they ended up forming political parties and they were on opposite sides. Hamilton on one side, Madison on the other. Let's see. They were the core leaders in the emerging party system. And it was a split in the camps of the Federalists, given their rise with Hamilton as its leader, and the Democratic Republicans with Madison, Thomas Jefferson at the helm of that faction. And so the first party system in the United States lasted from about 1792 until 1824, and it featured the Federalist Party and the Democratic Republican Party, also called the Jeffersonian Republican Party. Federalist Party grew from the network of Washington's Secretary of Treasury Alexander Hamilton, who favored a strong central government, close ties to Britain, centralized banking system, and close links between the government and men of wealth. The Democratic Republican Party, founded by Madison and Thomas Jefferson, strongly opposed Hamilton's agenda. The Jeffersonians came to power in 1800, and the Federalists were too elitist to compete effectively. The Federalists survived in the Northeast, but their refusal to support the War of 1812 verged on secession and was a devastating blow when the war ended as well. And that kind of ended the first party system. The second party system lasted from 1828 to 1854, and that was dominated by the Whig Party and the Democratic Party. Whig Party is led by Henry Clay, and the Democratic Party led by Andrew Jackson. And that particular party system fell apart as we got closer and closer to the Civil War. That is, slavery started fragmenting things. Third party system stretched from 1854 to the mid-1890s and was characterized by the emergence of the anti-slavery Republican Party, which adopted many of the economic policies of the Whigs, such as national banks, railroads, high tariffs, homesteads, and aid to land-grant colleges. The Democratic Party was in large part the opposition party during this period, although it often controlled the Senate or the House of Representatives.
Okay, so I have a question. The issue of slavery prior to the Republican Party being established,
Right.
how is that handled amongst the parties that...
No one party was fully one way or the other. That is, the parties were not quite as regionalized and separated by that issue. It's just as time went by, it became more and more of an issue with people, and eventually, like I said, led to the founding of the Republican Party as a specifically anti-slavery movement.
Right.
Which is why in 1860, when Abraham Lincoln was elected to the presidency, the southern states immediately started seceding from the Union. That is, before Lincoln even took office, they were bailing because they saw the handwriting on the wall. You have a Republican, anti-slavery, he's now the president. This is not going to be good for the South.
Now, his first vice president, what party was... I know the second vice president was a Democrat because he was trying to keep the country together.
Right.
It's not like now where you pick somebody from your own party. And I was astounded by this. And when I teach government to the kids, when we talk about government, I teach third grade, and I have a really strong government unit at the beginning of the year. And then we revisit it when we talk about Washington and Lincoln when their birthdays roll around. And I kind of blend that into Black History Month with the slavery issue and civil rights and all that. So we kind of talk about this for about half of the year, roughly. So I was astounded to learn that Lincoln's second vice president was a Democrat, because I just always assumed it was this way. But he did it to balance the ticket because the southern states were seceding so quickly, and he was trying to keep the country together. And that actually played into him having a Democrat vice president, actually played into what happened with the freed slaves after Lincoln died, after he was assassinated. So, and I always point that out to the kids because that's stuff that you're not necessarily taught, or that you're aware of when you're taught it. Like, you don't think... If I was taught that, it didn't hit a nerve with me. But all of a sudden I was like, whoa, I didn't think that like a Republican president would have a Democrat vice president or vice versa, because we always just pick somebody from our own team to be on there, because if you die, then you want somebody from the same team picking up the baton and continuing the race. But anyway, that's the end of our segment. I don't see any comments from anybody. We do have some more guests. My friend Angie, who just can't get enough of me all week because her son's in my class, so she has to listen to me talk on WebEx all week. She's here, and Dennis is here, and let's see who else. Oh, we have a few. And so shout out to you guys that are listening. If you have any questions or thoughts or comments or ideas for another show, please make sure you put it in the comment box at the end of each segment. I will bring the questions and the comments in. So we're glad to have you guys here, and please ask questions. I'm usually am the one who asks a lot of questions, but we like it when the audience participates as well.
Hannibal Hamlin was his first vice president.
And what party was he from?
Republican.
Okay.
Although he'd spent most of his life as a Democrat.
And that's the other thing, too, is switching your vice president when you run a second time.
Well, part of it was from a pragmatic standpoint. That is, since the Civil War was coming to an end, his thought was that might help unify things better than otherwise. Not that it actually was a useful choice. He probably would have done better with Hannibal Hamlin, because at least Hamlin was opposed to slavery, and Andrew Johnson, or what was Johnson's first name?
I think it was Andrew, wasn't it?
Probably.
Because
Anyway,
I mix him up with Andrew Jackson.
yeah. So Andrew Johnson was his second vice president, and just not very good at it. Yeah, the U.S. would have ended up in a different place had Lincoln not been assassinated. That is, the civil rights movement would have taken off much earlier.
Yes. Well, he favored the right for black men to vote.
Right.
Women of any color didn't have the right to vote yet, but that started during those times, which I just learned. When Lincoln also had the 40 acres and a mule, which I tell my students, that's like somebody giving you a house and a car. So, they go, 40 acres and a mule, a piece of land and a donkey. It's like, that seems like pretty sad reparations. But I tell them, I said, that's like somebody giving you a house and a car.
Keep in mind
and a
that
job.
in that era, the United States was still largely an agricultural nation.
Yeah.
That is, most people worked the farms. That is, in the modern world, less than 3% of our population now works on farms.
So now if they give you 40 acres and a mule, you'd be
wouldn't know
like,
what to
okay,
do.
this sucks.
Yeah.
I cannot commute to LA on a mule, sorry.
But in that era, that was what
Yeah.
everybody did. I mean, even my own grandfather, both of them, and my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a sharecropper. My grandfather on my father's side had a farm, as well as being a steam engineer, and then during the Depression he also worked in a penitentiary as a guard.
He wasn't an inmate.
No, he wasn't an inmate.
Grandpa was in the state pen. He worked there.
He worked there.
Yes. Or so they say.
But anyway, yeah. But nowadays, most people don't have farms. It's just not the normal way of doing things. But
it
up
would be
until
like being given a job, like job training and a house and a car.
Right.
And that's pretty reasonable. But
Yes.
then Johnson got rid of that because he didn't favor voting rights for blacks and for black men, and he didn't think they should get anything. So things went really badly after that, and that's where you get that whole system of sharecropping, because they were just kind of, okay, I'm free, now what? So it's like, okay, well, you can live here and you can work the land and we'll let you have a little bit of the food because now it's illegal for us to take it from you.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
But-
But then you had the Jim Crow laws being passed in the
Right.
South, and segregation and all of those things that after the end of Reconstruction in the 1870s, things reverted. It is up until about the 1870s you had a lot of African Americans, black people, being in positions of power and authority. That is, you have several Republican senators and congressmen from the South. But that all came to a screeching halt after Reconstruction ended, because the Southern whites just would not go along with that, and restricted the ability of blacks to get employment, to vote, to live decent lives.
right.
Still, because Republicans largely dominated Washington during the third party system from 1854 to 1890s, you still have a lot of African Americans that participated in the federal government. This came to a halt in 1912 when Woodrow Wilson became president, because Woodrow Wilson was, how to put it nicely, there's no nice way to put it, he was a flaming racist. And so he instituted segregation on the federal level. He segregated the military, he segregated everything. And so things really went downhill for the African American community after Wilson's time in office. The one bright spot in Wilson's era was the 19th Amendment allowing women to vote. Mm-hmm. But otherwise, Wilson was not a very nice man. Mm-hmm. And created all sorts of problems that were not, well, the segregation of the military wasn't rectified until Truman, following Roosevelt's administration. He desegregated the military finally. Fourth party system lasted from 1896 to 1932. It ended in 1932 because of the Great Depression. That created a huge realignment in everything. And so the fifth and sixth party systems have existed since 1933, which is what we're used to now. Mm-hmm. So the Democrat and Republican parties as parties, as separate parties, they've lasted a long time. That is, they go back to just before the Civil War as entities kind of like what they are. The positions of the parties have wandered about over the years and shifted. Because of Roosevelt and his New Deal, that's when you had a lot of African Americans moving from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party. Up until 1932, African Americans were almost exclusively Republican. But some of the things that Roosevelt did appealed to African Americans, the economic stuff, and so you had some shifting. Although the full shift didn't happen until after the Civil Rights Act in 1964 and what Lyndon Johnson was doing. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of moved the bulk
kind of solidified
solidified the African Americans into the Democratic Party, which is odd historically given the way the Democrats were up until then. But again, you had a shift in how Democrats handled things.
Well, and economics plays a huge part.
Economics plays a huge role in anything. That is, bread and butter issues are really what motivate most people in the choices they make, what they think that they're going to gain from one or the other parties.
Well, the current administration's philosophy is all politics are economic. And if you look, like the basis of everything he does is on economics.
Right.
It's like other countries not paying enough money, okay, pay your money. You know, things like that. But him being a businessman, he sees everything through that lens of money and all that.
The United States, because the way the system is set up, has ended up primarily with a two-party system. A multi-party system doesn't work very well when you have the kind of government that we have, where you have the government divided into three branches, where you have an executive branch, legislative branch, judicial branch. In a parliamentary system, you essentially have two branches, because the leader of the legislature is also the executive in a parliamentary system.
It's your prime minister.
It's your prime minister. And so in a parliamentary system, a multi-party system actually works pretty well, because then you have to form coalitions. And so, for instance, if you look at Israel today, Israel's politics over the last decade have been, it's very hard for one party or the other to gain, or actually through their entire history, no one party has had complete control and dominance. As for most of Israel's history, the Labor Party was dominant. That shifted in the 1980s when Menachem Begin was elected from the Likud party. But But even so, the Labour Party prior to that, the Likud Party since then, they've always had to form coalitions with other
Why
smaller
did that
parties.
shift happen?
Because
What
the
was special
economy,
about
well, the
Malcolm
economy was
Reagan?
going south. As Labour Party was a socialist party, and
Well, they had the kibbutz system, which
well, the
you
kibbutz system,
participated
the
in.
kibbutz system existed back then, and had existed since the 1930s. That is, the first people moving into Israel were forming kibbutzim, which are communes. And so they were communist or socialist in their orientation. The dominant frame of thinking for most of the early immigrants to Israel was socialist. It wasn't exclusively that way, so again you had multiple parties, and so always coalitions. And you had people that were not socialist in the group as well. But the Israeli economy was in significant trouble in the 1970s and early 80s as inflation got out of control to a large extent. And so that made people shift, again, bread and butter issues. Things aren't working, we'll try this way instead. And so that's
Right.
how Likud ended up taking part, becoming dominant, and Likud has remained dominant as the Israeli economy stabilized and has become more prosperous over the years. But the Labour Party is still an important aspect of Israeli politics, just like in Great Britain. It moves between the Labour Party or the Conservative Party. Labour Party is essentially sort of socialist, and the Conservative Party is not. It's hard to say either the Labour Party in Israel or the Labour Party in England they're certainly not wild-eyed socialists. They're much more realistic in their handling of things.
But what I think is interesting is that when things weren't going well, they switched back.
Right.
But that's a really scary place to be. Like, what if it doesn't switch back? You could end up like Venezuela.
Yeah.
If somebody gets it in their head that they're going to be the dictator,
Well,
you end up in a lot of
one of the
trouble.
things to keep in mind about politics in South America in general is a lot of the South American countries have not been overly stable anyway. That is, you've had over the years many coups, and it's been very difficult for them to get used to a democratic organization. Is you have for instance, India is the world's largest democracy. And you look at India and you see extreme poverty as well as extreme wealth, and you would think that this should not be an ideal place for democracy to work, and yet they're a completely stable democracy and it works very, very well. And you wonder, okay, how is it that they can do that and they can shift from one side to the other and things just continue going along just fine. England, same thing. Australia, New Zealand, Israel. There are several examples of countries that you see them shifting their positions back and forth. Greece, for instance. I mean, despite all the economic upheaval that Greece has had, they've generally remained relatively stable. But then you look at South American countries, and they've just been a mess for a very long time, and I'm not entirely sure why they've had that difficulty. So Venezuela is an interesting conundrum. That is, why is it that their democracy has not been very stable? That is, why did they move to a place where they have had essentially one dictator after another? And then
do you think it may be cultural?
There may be cultural things. It may be economic. I'm not sure. I haven't studied it in depth to know why they have the difficulty. Because ordinarily, and see, this is the brilliance of a democratic, representative democratic system, is that they generally are more stable than practically any other form of government, which is counterintuitive. But you look at the most stable countries in the world: Canada, Australia, New Zealand, the United States, Israel, Great Britain, France.
Of course, Canada and Australia are under the British Crown, but they're part of the UK.
Well, that's one thing that people have wondered about, because the places where England controlled things for a while, a lot of those places have turned out pretty well in independence. But then you have a few examples where they haven't. So it's not always the case.
So I have this question for you, and I'm not slamming anybody's religion, so let me just say that at the outset, is do you think it's because maybe the predominance of Catholicism where the Pope, like the one central thing like the Pope and what are the cardinals, like all the decisions come out of there, that central, do you think maybe that makes them more prone to dictatorships?
I don't know. It's an interesting question because, to give you a counterexample, Germany is predominantly Protestant. It's the place that the Protestant Reformation began, and yet the worst dictator in history, one of them, came from there.
Okay.
So I don't know that we
Could
can
that
actually
be a
say
statistical
that.
outlier, though?
I don't think so, because I think we could probably, if we were to examine different countries, we would find. I mean, India is not a Christian country. I mean, you do have Christians there, but it's predominantly Hindu.
But it's not. It's not. But does Hinduism have like a main figurehead?
Well, one of the things that's interesting
That's
about
the question.
Well, with Hinduism, you have a strict that is within the religious system as it's traditionally looked at and interpreted. You have the caste system, where you have a very clear-cut social stratification of things. You have the untouchables down here and the Brahmins at the top. And so that would seem counter to a workable democracy, and yet it's done just fine. So I'm not sure even culturally if that's the whole thing.
You have the lower class, the middle class, and the upper class. We kind of sort of have that in the democracies.
In some of them, well, in any of them,
because socialism strives to make everybody on the same plane.
Yeah,
so
you can't do that, though.
any society that has a caste system or levels like that.
But see, Great Britain has pretty firmly defined social levels, and actually a lot of European countries, their social stratification is much more stringent than what ours is. The United States is unusual in our social levels are not nearly as firmly defined, and people move back and forth between them much more easily. I mean, there are issues, and obviously a rich person, middle class person, and lower class person, the way they think is radically different.
Right.
That is the whole Ruby Bridges thing that you pointed out.
Not Ruby Bridges, Ruby Payne.
Ruby Payne.
She had done a lot of research with the different wealth classes, that poverty, middle class, and wealth. So like someone who lives in poverty, they're constantly in survival mode. You know, you can get this today, you might not be able to get it tomorrow. Middle class kind of is in that place where, you know, you're setting up your retirement, and you know that you'll work for so many years, you'll retire, maybe travel for a while, and then get old and die.
Cheerful.
I'm hoping for retirement in the next 5 years. But anyway, and then the wealth class has like a stock portfolio, and they invest in things. And to take a person from the poverty class and put them into the wealth class, it would be like you going to a completely foreign culture, like going from, you know, the United States to China, and all of a sudden having to survive. Like, you have no idea what, like, the language is different in the sense that the terms that they use, like, you know, you go to these parties and be like, oh, so what have you added to your stock portfolio? You know, and, oh, I have to get my driver, you know, and things like that. And people from poverty, they don't understand that. They're just glad their car starts when they start it up in the morning. So there's, I mean, I was joking, I was being extreme and joking, but that's kind of the premise of what we learned. And we learned that quite a few years ago in education, because we have children that are from the poverty class that we don't understand because we're like middle class, and so there's things that we don't understand that they totally get, because that's it's like a culture unto itself.
Right.
It's really quite interesting. What's the title of the book? Anyway, it's Ruby Payne, Payne, and her book is, oh shoot, I can't think of it. But it's really fascinating reading. Now there's other books that have come out since then because there's been more research and so it's not quite that well defined, but I think it's a good entry place if you want to understand how that works.
Things are always going to be a lot more complicated than that is. From a distance, you can kind of see these basic divisions, but then as you get closer, it becomes much more fuzzy.
Right. And there's a lot of there's people moving up to the middle class from the poverty group, because I was raised really poor, and when Head Start was starting up was around the time that I would be going to Head Start, and my mother was approached by, I don't know where she was or what the deal was, but anyway, they said, because we were so poor, they said, well, we want to offer your daughter Head Start because you're underprivileged. And she's like, my daughter's not underprivileged. She has books. She can read and all that. And they seemed a little surprised because we were in poverty, but I had books and I was already reading. And I remember my uncle giving me $20 for more books because my parents didn't have, I was reading the same books over and over again because we didn't have money for more books, but I had tons of books. I had my own bookshelf in my room. We lived in a single wide trailer. My dad had raised my bed up above the floor so I could play underneath it. So it was like a playroom, and then it was like a bunk bed with only the top bunk. And he built me a ladder and everything. So, and there wasn't a whole lot of space up there either. I think about it now, to me it seemed like plenty of space, but I was really tiny. So we lived there till I was 6. And then my brother was born, and then my dad moved churches, and we moved to an actual house. But anyway, so my room was basically the size of a twin bed. To me, it was like a palace, and one wall was books. And I had my own encyclopedia set. It's at my parents', my Compton encyclopedia. And I would use that like textbooks. I would teach my dog and my stuffed animals because I was born a teacher. I had a slate chalkboard, which I still have. I have it stashed away in my closet. But anyway, we're at the end of a segment. So, but anyway, assuming too that people are a certain way because they're in that class is not, I know what I was going to say. So moving up to middle class, and I noticed this with my parents too, it's hard for them to realize that, okay, so we can go grocery shopping this week, and we're going to be able to go grocery shopping next week. So my impulse when I grocery shop is to buy everything I can get now, because I might not have the money for it next time. And what's interesting is I pretty much gotten past that. It still is always in the back of my head, but until COVID, when we couldn't get toilet paper, paper towels, there were certain groceries you couldn't get and all that. And so I now have an overabundance of food. I just sorted through our freezer today because we have way too much food. And I realized I don't really need to buy any meat for next month because I bought so much last month. And I'm like, okay, I need to chill out because there's meat. I was kind of stocking up on meat because there had been some meat packing plants that had been closed because of COVID. And so I wasn't hoarding. I was just like, okay, so we're going to eat about this much meat for the month. So I'll buy 4 of these and 2 of these and whatever. But so now I'm kind of backing down on that. Like today when we were at Costco, we were picking up food for one of the ladies in our church. And there was a ton of water bottles. I was like, dang, they have a lot of water bottles. And I was like, I should buy some. I'm like, I've got water bottles. It's all good. We're not shopping for this right now. But I fight that thing because there were times that we went without food.
This is part of the reason why people that win the lottery, because primarily the lottery is a tax on the poor, or those that can't do math. And figure out what the odds are, but it's primarily a tax that we place on the poor people because they need money, and this would be a way to get it even though the odds aren't in their favor. But part of the reason why people that win the lottery then blow it so quickly is precisely that. They still have that same poverty mindset, and so even though they've gotten enough money that if they were careful with it and used it well, would last them for the rest of their lives, they use it all at once because, well, what if I find, I gotta get this down.
Right. Well, you see that with manna, though, in the Bible.
Yes.
When God provided the manna, he said, you pick what you need for the day, because if you pick any more than that, it's going to go bad. Now, the only time you didn't was right before the Sabbath. You picked extra to get you through the 2 days, to get you through that day and the Sabbath, and then you could get fresh the next
But
day.
it took them a while to get used to that because they were hungry, and so well, we can't get as much as we can.
Yeah. So it's human nature.
Yes, it is.
And
well, that's part of the reason why we have an obesity issue, is because through most of human history, starvation was a constant concern. And human beings through most of their history have not had enough to eat. And so now that we live in an era where hunger and starvation simply don't happen, except for exceptional circumstances where you have war or something like that, or really corrupt governments, we still, from an evolutionary standpoint, still want to stuff ourselves all the time, and so we have an abundance, and so we stuff ourselves. And yeah, the biggest problem for human beings today is not starvation. Our biggest problem is obesity. This is an improvement, but I'd rather that we have an obesity problem than a starvation problem.
right.
But it's an interesting example of our minds not catching up with reality yet. Now, the United States, although it's dominated by two major parties, Republicans and Democrats, as you look at the individuals that make up that party, you will find that that is, our founding fathers view factionalism as a feature, not a bug in the system, because what factions do under normal circumstances is force compromise. And the founding fathers wanted to create a system of government that was not too efficient. Efficient governments end up goose-stepping. You don't want that. So you want a government that's not all that efficient and that is slow to change. That is, you have to have a good reason to make a change, and you've got to get enough people to agree that, yes, we do have to make this change in order for it to happen. And so the factions is part of the way that keeps that under control. And so even though you have two major parties and one party or the other will take control of federal government at any given point, then of course you've got all the state governments which have their own issues.
Well,
but within the two parties, even in the federal government, you have a lot of different factions. They don't all agree. They come from different parts of the United States. They come from different social and economic standpoints. They all have their own ideas. And so getting all these kittens to do anything, even if they're part of your own party,
Congress kittens,
is not necessarily all that easy. That is, you look at the previous president, the current president, trying to get things through Congress, even when they control both houses of Congress, it's really hard because you have factions within your own party.
You know what they call a group of baboons?
What?
A Congress. Which is funny. I learned that. I was teaching 3rd grade, and we were doing vocabulary for the government unit at the beginning of the year, and I was looking up synonyms I was looking up definitions, the definition of Congress, and it said a group of baboons. Well, at that time, the government was shut down, so because they couldn't agree on signing some funding thing, so the government was shut down. And the kids and I have been talking about this, how the government was shut down, because they were like thinking that like now there were no laws and everything was happening. It's like, no, everything still functions. There's just certain things you can't do. The
Congress
when I
doing
told
even less
them,
than they normally do.
I was doing multiple meaning words. That's what it was. So on my chart, I do multiple meaning words, and one of the definitions of Congress was a group of baboons. I go, that's kind of fitting, huh? They're just a bunch of baboons, and that's why they couldn't pass this law to fund the government.
Yes,
so.
that's the case. And see,
so I just, when I hear something from Congress and it's stupid, I just think, well, they're just a bunch of baboons.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
But you look at any of the states that are dominated by one party or the other, you still have a hard time getting anything done and getting everybody to agree to actually vote for X, Y, or Z.
But that's
So,
why
but
that's why
people-
the laws then end up being really a compromise.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get all those riders on the bills,
Yeah,
which have
because-
been an issue with the COVID.
Yeah, if you
funding
want
stuff.
a good movie to watch to see how this works, is the movie Lincoln. Came out a few years ago. It's when Lincoln was trying to get the Emancipation Proclamation thing done. And watching the politics at play in that is just the most fascinating thing. And how he made agreements with this group or that group or this person or that person in order to get this thing that he really wanted.
It's the whole
And so you
back
give-
room, smoke-filled room
so
thing,
I'll give you
yeah.
this if you give me this. And that's the way it works. This is why people say you don't want to see how sausage is made, you don't want to see how laws are made. It's the way it is. This is why I keep telling people that government is a necessary evil. It's necessary, but it's also wicked.
Yes.
So, and it's unavoidable. That is, it goes to the very beginning. I've talked about before. If you look at 1 Samuel chapters 8 through 12, when Israel asked for a king, and Samuel's very upset about it, and God says, you know, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. This is an evil thing they're doing, but okay, we'll work with it. And Samuel tells them, you've done a wicked thing. And the people agree, yes, we've done something evil, but we still want the
still
king
want it,
anyway.
yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm going to eat the marshmallow. I don't care that there's another one coming if I don't touch it.
Yes,
I'm gonna eat
government
the
is evil.
marshmallow.
It's necessary, but it is evil. And it's messy. That's the other thing. It's messy. It's always been messy. It's always going to be messy. You don't want... And see, even... This is the other thing. Even governments that goose step are not efficient. That is, even dictatorships are not efficient because politics still come into play. Because if people become unhappy enough with this dictator, bad things happen to him. He finds a knife in his back, whatever.
Right.
Because he's got people around him that may be vying for his job.
Well, Kim Jong-un, people think that he's running the country. He's not. He's bowing to the people around him that are telling him, you better do this or we're going to... And they will just flat out kill him. I mean, look what happened to his brother, his cousin, whatever.
Well, he killed his brother.
Huh?
He killed his brother.
Well, I know. No, but the guy in the airport or something that
Yeah.
died, was that his brother? Okay.
Yeah, he took him out
Right.
because he viewed him as a threat.
Right.
And see, that's the other thing. If you read through the Bible and you look, particularly the Northern Kingdom, I mean, monarchy is not... See, again, democracies are the most stable form of government. Monarchies, dictatorships, they are not stable. Because
Democratic republics are more
Democratic
stable.
republics.
Pure democracy isn't stable.
Yeah, well, there is no such thing as a pure democracy. When we use the word democracy, we mean a representative form of government because that's just the way it works. You vote for these people that will then do the business meetings so you don't have to. Yeah, read through the books of 2 Kings or 2 Chronicles and look at how, you know, you have this king, he takes out his brothers and sisters because he's afraid that they're going to take his place, or his mother will take him out, or, you know, this general over here comes and kills him, and then another guy kills that general. It's just a bloody mess. That's the way monarchies are. That's the way dictatorships are. They are very unstable.
Well, that's why our peaceful transition of government
Is a remarkable
so
thing.
amazing because, like, literally when a new president comes in, the other president moves out, the U-Haul truck pulls up, they load it up, not the president himself. That would be the nice thing about being president is I wouldn't have to move my own crap. And then that U-Haul truck pulls away and the other U-Haul truck pulls up and unloads the new president's stuff.
The only thing with representative democracies is there's a lot of yelling and screaming that goes on. And in times past, actually, in our system of government, you had people, Congress people, you know, shooting each other or beating each other over the head with canes and things like that.
Well, just in
So-
the movie Hamilton or the play
Yes.
Hamilton, you know, they had the duel
Yes.
at the end.
Yeah, you had the vice president
Aaron
shooting
Burr.
the Secretary of the Treasury.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, we're much more civil now.
yes. Although people will tell you we're not, but we
Yeah.
are. Mostly,
People lack
the duels
knowledge.
happen on Twitter now.
Yeah, people lack a knowledge of history. They don't have historical perspective. All they see is what exists in their lifetime, which is a very brief blip. History really helps you learn not to worry. Anyway, should point out, we've got 9 minutes, that the United States does have some other minor parties. The longest lasting and the largest of the minor parties is the Libertarian Party. It was formed December 11th, 1971. And they've managed over the years to get a lot of local people elected, and actually, let's see, in May 2020, Justin Amish, Republican from Michigan, switched to the Libertarian Party and became the first Libertarian Party member of Congress. So that's the highest that any Libertarian has managed to get to this point. But the Libertarians usually get 3 or 4% of the vote at any given point, and so they end up being on all the ballots usually. Some of the other smaller parties would be the Green Party, the Constitution Party. Those would be the other two larger small parties.
Now, Green Party, that was
That
Ross
started in the
Perot,
1980s.
right?
No, Green
Oh.
Party is a environmental
Right.
dominated party. Ross Perot was his own individual thing.
Okay.
That has not lasted. But that was just his own thing. Kind of like what Theodore Roosevelt did in 1912, forming the Bull Moose Party when he became disenfranchised with the Republican Party as a whole, and Howard Taft in particular.
Well, now there's the birthday party, which makes me laugh every time I hear it. Kanye's political party is the birthday party.
You're kidding.
No, you didn't know
I didn't
that?
know that's what he called
yes,
it. Oh,
yes,
I hadn't
that
heard
is
that.
his party.
That's
It's the
funny.
birthday party.
Okay, well,
and
there's
it
another
makes me
minor
laugh
party.
every time. And, I mean, it's not going to come to much, but...
No, not as much as the Bull Moose Party.
Yeah,
Probably
but
less.
it's just funny.
That is funny.
It's like, I'm a member of the birthday party. I wear a cone hat and I blow a streamery thing. So I don't know what those are called.
Yeah, the Green Party...
That's funny that you didn't know that.
Yeah, the Green Party has been active as third party since the 1980s. First gained widespread public attention during Ralph Nader's second presidential run in 2000. And then the Constitution Party is a small national conservative political party founded as the U.S. Taxpayers Party in 1992 by Howard Phillips, and that was changed to the Constitution Party in 1999. Let's see, Congressman Tom Tancredo was the Constitution Party candidate for governor of Colorado, coming in second with 36.4% ahead of Republican candidate.
Interesting.
So
Now, Pat Paulson, what party did he run
he
under?
was his own thing,
Okay.
I think.
Okay. That was just funny every year.
Yeah. So
He was a comedian who's dead now who would run for president like
Yeah.
every year.
yeah, it was just a joke.
Yeah.
And you do have those kind of joke candidates that show up every year as you go along, every time there's an election.
Yeah.
And they just do it for fun. Because anybody can run for president that wants to if they're above the age of 35, and you can form your own political party if you feel like it.
Yep. Kanye did.
Yeah, that is, you're not limited to just two parties in the United States. It's just because of the nature of the system, that is, the way the Constitution is set up, it's going to naturally produce a two-party system. So and that's why we've always had a two-party system since 1792, after Washington. It's kind of inevitable.
Well, you do have
And even
people in Congress that are like some independent.
Yeah, and even in the countries that have a multi-party system, like Israel, Great Britain, any country that has a parliamentary system, you still tend to have two of the parties being the major parties, and then you have a lot of smaller, minor parties. Great Britain, you have three major parties, although it's really only two major parties. The Liberal Party is just not that robust. But that would be the other major party in England, but then you're going to have some smaller bits. Germany, you've got several different parties. I think France is parliamentary systems. You've got several different parties.
What party is the current Prime Minister of England? I forget his name.
And Canada is a parliamentary system, as I recall.
What's his name? Boris Johnson?
He's Tory.
Okay.
conservative.
Yeah, I think it's funny. He looks a little bit like Donald Trump. That just cracks me up.
Well, his hair is
I know.
weird.
Yeah, and it's kind of that odd color.
Yeah.
And it's like always askew. I mean, he looks a little bit like Albert Einstein. His hair is like always messy. But he looks like Donald Trump, and that just cracks me up.
No,
Although he's
funny.
getting physically fit because he had COVID. And he
Yes.
realized he could die because he was so heavy, and so he's been walking, and he's leading a fitness movement in England. Yeah, for people to
Which is
get
not a
more
bad
walking
thing
in.
at all.
And it would be hard to walk in England because there's so much rain. But I don't know. That's just my perception. I don't know. I have
They
a
do
friend
have
from
they have sunny days too.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, back east it rains a lot. Ohio it rains a lot, but there's still sunny days. It's
Yeah.
just we're used, here in the Antelope Valley where we live, 350 days out of the year at least, no rain.
Yeah.
Sunshine, which is why we like living here. We like
Right.
the light, brightness, blue skies.
Well, it's been unusual because we've had a lot
It's
of
not as
smoke in the
depressing.
air.
Yeah, it's been
We
depressing.
Because we had actual fire come onto the desert floor, which is unusual. It doesn't usually come that far down. Well, it really doesn't ever come that far down. The last time, it was probably about 10 years ago, it came over the hill there at Rancho Vista, but it stopped at kind of at the houses. But where it came over this time, it's really sparsely populated. There's a lot of like ranches and stuff out there. So it really just ate through the desert, and we had smoke for days. It was bad. And I had kids that couldn't do their 20 minutes of physical activity every day because we're doing distance learning. So I told the parents, if your kid's not allowed to do physical activity because of the smoke, just mark other on their form and I'll count it, because you can't make kids be physically active when there's that much smoke. And then it was really hot. It was well over 100 every day, and the humidity was really high. And
For us.
yeah. So
Most places they think
well,
it's dry.
it was our monsoon season, because when there's
humidity.
hurricanes off the Baja, Mexico, we get a lot of like thunderstorms and high humidity.
Yeah, which
just
means
like
20% humidity.
right. Tucson, well, Arizona gets the same thing too, but it's coming off of. It's different. It's that little. It's not the Baja. It's that little. Is it Sea of Cortez? It's between Baja and Mexico.
I'm not.
Anyway, when the storms come off of there, then Arizona gets its monsoon season
Yeah.
too, and it's roughly the same as ours. Ours is just influenced by different storm systems
Yeah.
because they're actually in the Pacific. But anyway, it's just been really muggy, and like my swamp coolers were all on because we don't have air conditioning right now, and I'm just sitting there just sweating. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sweating profusely. It was bad. So
Yes.
very uncomfortable, make you grumpy, all that good
Yes.
stuff. So
Okay, well, we're pretty much
yep,
out of time
we
now.
are. And
If anybody has ideas for next time, now again,
Yep.
we won't be here next week because it's Labor Day weekend,
Yep.
so everybody's off on holiday.
we're home on
Or
holiday.
home on holiday, given it's COVID.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll be on holiday.
But the
the
following
following
week
week will
is
be,
poetry.
No,
No, it's not.
the Romantic Era.
We did that last week, didn't we?
No, we didn't do the Romantic Era last week.
Were we supposed to do it this week?
Yes, that's what we were going to do today.
Oops.
But you changed it.
No.
so-
Oh, well, no, because I asked you. I said, this is the political parties, right? I thought we did Romantic Era last week.
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We did How to Think Clearly.
Oh.
More clearly.
Maybe I should have listened better to that show. So I'm thinking very
No,
I was
this-
very excited about this topic, though.
Yeah, you came up with it last week and you decided we're going to do
Oh.
it this week. So we did it this week in place of what was originally scheduled, which
Okay.
was what
But you had told
What
me
is it to live
that
in a
you
roman-
wanted, right, but you
What-
wanted to do Romantic Era, and I was like, oh, okay, that'll be good, and then we'll do political parties.
No,
I
we did
changed
political
it.
parties first because that's what you wanted.
Oh.
And I'm perfectly happy to go with something that somebody suggests besides just what pops out of my own head.
Okay, well, I
So
gotta change
romantic-
church
we live in
announcements,
a
yeah.
romantic era, and that is an era dominated by emotions more than rationality. And it's not the first time in history that this has happened, and actually we're kind of Well, anyway, we'll talk about it the next time that we are here, assuming, unless somebody comes up with a better idea, in which case we'll do that instead.
Or unless I just randomly change it because I am foggy-headed.
So anyway, go ahead and give the last commercial thing, and then we will let people go.
Okay, so we are here on all the Saturdays that we're here. Sometimes we're not, so don't tune in. But we are here almost every Saturday at 4 o'clock. So we invite you to join us on YouTube or on Facebook. If you are looking for a place to worship and you want to stay home and worship from home, you can find our church on Facebook, Quartz Hill Community Church, and we live stream there and on YouTube. You can subscribe to our channel on YouTube and get the services that way. We're not really doing classes with School of Theology. I mean, I suppose you
There's
could
the
do
online stuff that you could do. But
yeah, and all that information is there and it's free. But if you want credit, you have to pay a nominal fee for it. So anyway,
with COVID, there's nothing else going on.
Yeah. So anyway, I want to thank people for joining us. My friend Angie was here. My cousin Steve came, and Dennis is here, and let's see, my mom came. So yeah, so it was good to see you guys in the way that we see you, in little chat bubbles on my phone.
Yes, we don't actually get to see them, but on screen all we can see is ourselves.
Yes, but if you know of anybody that might be interested in listening, let them know how to find us. Yeah, because we'd like to expand our viewership. We do get views when we're not live. So, but
yeah, one of the things you can do on Facebook is share the webcast. So if you want to do that, share it with your friends, feel free.
Yep.
Let more people know
that we're here, because we want to have timely topics and be able to answer people's questions.
Right.
So that's
more the better.
Yep. So you guys have a good Labor Day, and we'll see you the week after for the topic that was supposed to be today's.
Yes.